It is so good to see mages get a lot of love in Season of Discovery, because since 2019, they've just been terrible. From really, really slow levelers in vanilla, having a nightmare during TBC when it comes to making gold because of how squishy they are, and then just barely doing any damage in Wrath of the Lich King, so just struggling to get raid spots overall. So it's really nice to see that they can broaden their horizons a little bit in Season of Discovery, because not only are they going to be able to absolutely pump on damage meters, they're also going to be able to heal as well. All sarcasm aside, I do genuinely think that in the right hands, a healing mage, or a regen mage as I'm referring to it, is going to be absolutely nuts. If you're not aware already and you haven't seen any Season of Discovery content so far, I mean, what have you been doing? You're going to get a bunch of new abilities during Season of Discovery, and they come from runes. Up until the point of level 25, which is the cap in phase 1, you're going to have a total of 12 runes that you can collect. There'll be a choice of 4 on your chest, 4 on your legs, and 4 on your gloves. Talent wise, it gets a little bit tricky because you've only got access to 16 points in total, but depending on what runes you use is going to heavily dictate the type of talent build that you actually create. So let's get into what new abilities you're going to get from these runes. Starting with the glove runes, because it's looking like these are going to be the first ones you're going to get access to. You've got an old familiar arcane spell called Arcane Blast, where you blast the target with energy, dealing 190 to 221 arcane damage. Each time you cast Arcane Blast, the damage and healing of all other arcane spells is increased by 15%, and the mana cost of Arcane Blast is also increased by 175%. This effect stacks up to 4 times and lasts 6 seconds, or until any other arcane damage or healing spell is cast. So the traditional way to play arcane when you've got Arcane Blast is to have a burst phase and to have a regen phase. Your burst phase will be just going ham with all your cooldowns and just pressing Arcane Blast as much as your mana pool will allow, because you know you're going to have either Kate or your mana gem or mana potion or whatever to fall back on to get your mana back up. At which point you're then doing sort of a regen phase where you're going Arcane Blast, maybe then missiles. Your mana pool is going to dictate how many Arcane Blasts you can get out without your mana going too low, and then you're waiting for your burst phase again. Now the interesting thing is how this is going to synergize with the healing runes though, which we're going to get onto very soon. Another old familiar spell for frost mages is Ice Lance, where it deals a small amount of damage, only being 23 to 27 frost damage, but it causes triple damage against frozen targets. Not really a lot to say there. It's going to be a frost or a PvP talent, but it is very good and it does start to hit very hard, obviously, as you start to get plus frost damage or plus spell damage. Living Bomb for the fire mages, where the target becomes a living bomb, taking 142 fire damage over 12 seconds, and at the end of that 12 seconds, or if the spell is dispelled, the target explodes, dealing 72 fire damage to all enemies nearby. Again, it's a staple move for fire mages, but more so when you're sort of using it to actually get an extra chance at a crit to get instant pyroblast procs. That could come in the future in a different rune, possibly. But either way, it's a great addition to the fire mage toolkit. Now, Rewind Time is the final one, and this is for you healing mages. This ain't going to make a great deal of sense until we get into the other runes, so I'd rather just come back to this one. So let's go straight onto the chest. First of all, you've got Burnout, which increases your spell crit chance with all spells by 15%, but your non-periodic spell critical strikes now have an additional mana cost of 1% of your base mana. Quite honestly, 15% crit for an extra 1% base mana on each spell, it's not that bad. In fact, it's a bloody good trade-off. Next up, you've got Enlightenment, where you deal 10% more damage while you have more than 70% mana, but while below 30% mana, 10% of your mana regen continues while casting. And this actually sort of plays into the whole burst phase and regen phase when you're arcane, because when you're above 70% mana, you'll be absolutely pumping, you're getting that extra damage, but then when you drop below 30% and you start doing your preservation phase, we'll call it, where you're just trying to get your mana back up and you're taking it quite easy, then you're going to get that extra regen kick in, so could be really good for arcane. Fingers of Frost is a great one, which many frost mages from future expansions will know about. It gives your chill effects a 15% chance to grant you the Fingers of Frost effect, which treats your next 2 spells as if the targets were frozen, and this lasts 15 seconds. Now, just looking at things like Shatter in the Frost Tree, you're going to get extra crit chance if something's frozen. So if your Fingers of the Frost is treating them like they're frozen, you're obviously going to get the benefits from talents like this. And of course, it will synergize really well with Ice Lance, because Ice Lance does triple damage if they're a frozen target. The big shame, though, is early on, you're only going to be able to get far enough down to put 1 point into Shatter, so whether the rune's worth it or not, I guess we'll find out. And now, finally, before we go back onto the glove rune, because now it will start to make more sense, This is your main healing mage ability. It's called Regeneration, hence why I called it the Regen Mage. So what it does is heals the target for 485 health over 3 seconds and applies Temporal Beacon for 30 seconds. So the secondary ability to this is it records the subject's space-time position. 100% of all arcane damage done by the caster will be converted to chromantic healing and divided among the target's current temporal beacon targets. So for any retail enjoyers or just future expansion enjoyers, it is very, very, very similar, almost exactly the same as Atonement for priests. So you're going to be wanting to get Temporal Beacon on people, then you're going to be bursting with arcane damage to heal them. But you can also do direct heals in the form of a sort of 3-second channel using Regeneration. But ultimately what you're wanting to do is control the fight and know who's going to be taking damage. So if it's a heavy tank fight, you're not going to want Temporal Beacon on loads of people. You're just going to want it on the tank. If it's a 2-tank fight and they're both taking sort of reliable, steady damage, you'll want Beacon on both of them, so you're dividing the healing between the two. I actually think it's going to be quite a sort of skillful healer to play, because you really need to understand what's going on in the fight and when you want maximum temporal beacons on as many people as possible, or you just want it on 1 or 2 people, or maybe even just 1. So I'm really happy with the way that the healing mage looks like it's going to play out. So what's interesting is when we go back to the glove runes. Now you've got rewind time, and this has got a minute cooldown. But your current target with your temporal beacon instantly heals all damage taken over the last 5 seconds. It is ineffective on targets that didn't have a temporal beacon 5 seconds ago. So this would be great for tanks, but it is a 1-minute cooldown. So once a minute, you're going to be able to literally more or less heal someone from who was just about to die to completely full health, which is really good, but it is only 1 target. My issue with this is I would say Arcane Blast is going to be the way to go, because we know how regeneration works where it is based on arcane damage. The rewind time's great as a big cooldown to top someone off extremely fast, but then you are relying on things like arcane missiles and maybe arcane explosion, but we're going to say pretty much arcane missiles. So I almost feel like in the early game, especially in phase 1 up to 25, Arcane Blast is going to be an absolute must. But still, rewind time, really cool ability, and I do look forward to playing around with it. Now for the leg runes, we've got Arcane Surge, which is a 2-minute cooldown, and it unleashes all of your remaining mana in a surge of energy focused at the target. And this deals an absolute truck ton of damage. It is all arcane damage, so it will synergize well with your regeneration, and it's increased by up to 300% based on your mana remaining. And then afterwards, your normal mana regeneration is activated and increased by 300% for 8 seconds. So you're going to have this massive big nuke on the target and use, well, as much of your mana as you've got left, and then you'll get a big amount of regen for the next 8 seconds. It is a 2-minute cooldown, which is quite interesting. This could be used by both DPS and healers, but only healers if you don't need mass regen, which we're going to get to in just a second. In fact, we might as well cover it now. So your other healing ability you can get from runes is exactly the same as regen, but now it's mass regen. So it heals all of the target player's party members within 15 yards of the target for 262 over 3 seconds and applies Temporal Beacon to each target for 15 seconds. The secondary part of this ability is exactly the same as regeneration. So now any arcane damage you do is it's gonna split that damage evenly amongst those 5 people as healing. Now the thing is, you're not always gonna need mass regeneration. There'll be fights where mass regeneration will be absolutely amazing. And then there's gonna be other cases where actually you only need it on a couple of people. You know, let's say you're doing a 5-man like Dead Mines or something like that. You're not going to need regeneration on the entire party because they're not all going to be taking damage. Most of the time, you'll be keeping it on the tank. Maybe someone else starts taking a bit of damage. So then you do the regeneration channel on that person. Now you've got a tank and one other person with Temporal Beacon on, and you're just going to nuke the boss or nuke the ad, whatever you're doing. Mass regeneration will be a lot more useful in raids, no doubt. But even then, it's going to be raid bosses where specifically lots of people are taking damage. Arcane Surge would probably be a risky one to replace it as a healer, because you are then going to have a small period where you're completely even though you're going to then get 8 seconds afterwards of really, really good regen. We'll have to see how that plays out, because at the moment I'm not sure I would ever want to get rid of all of my mana in one go and then someone needs a quick heal and I'm having to wait for regen. I don't know how that will quite work out. Next up, we've got Icy Veins, which again, we're probably very familiar with. It hastens your spellcasting, increasing spellcasting speed by 20%, and reduces the pushback suffered from damage and attacks while casting by 100%. It lasts 20 seconds, and it's on a 3-minute cooldown. Again, pretty much any spec, whether you're Frost, Fire, or Arcane, can make use of this, definitely. And it would be a nice throughput cooldown to use if you didn't need mass regeneration and you was healing. But obviously, it's a great cooldown to use if you're Frost and you're pumping out those Frost bolts, or you're Fire, pumping out those Fire bolts. It's just a 3-minute cooldown. Not really a lot else to say. And then finally, we've got Living Flame, which summons a Spellfire flame that moves toward the target, leaving a trail of Spellfire. This trail deals 42 Spellfire damage every second to nearby enemies, and it lasts 20 seconds. Now, this has a 1-minute cooldown, and the best thing I could really compare it to is Flame Orb that that mages will get in Cataclysm, where it just fires an orb that slowly moves towards the target, does damage to everyone on the way. It's, you know, it seems like that's sort of the route they've gone down, but this is just a little bit better because the fire stays on the floor, and hopefully tanks respect that and stand things in the fire so you get more damage. It's going to be absolutely useless if you want to heal, really, because it does spellfire damage, not arcane, so it's not going to actually contribute to your temporal beacons. But as a fire mage, really your options are fairly limited because you're either going for Icy Veins for a nice cooldown, or you're going for Living Flame where, yes, it's on a cooldown, but it's still a lot shorter of a cooldown and actually does damage. Overall, Mage has just got some amazing abilities, and as you know, I'm breaking all of these classes down for members only, so if you've joined the channel, thanks very much. If you're not sure how to support the channel, but you want something for yourself, then check out the Classic Era Rested XP speed leveling guides, because we're all probably going to be using them. Well, I mean, I'll be using them anyway, and obviously it's an affiliate link, so if you buy it, I get a bit of kickback as well. And trust me, if you haven't used it before, it really is the quickest way to level. Like and subscribe. See you on the next one.